Welcome to the Prado Museum. We're here again with our sessions in English a few minutes before the museum opens on the social media programming. This is a project supported by the nonprofit American Friends of the Prado Museum. We greatly appreciate your help and encourage you to find out about us and our sister institution in Spain, the Fundación Amigos del Museo del Prado. And today we're right in the heart of the Prado Museum, in the room dedicated to royal portraiture by Velázquez. And we're going to have a look at this wonderful portrait of the first official image of Philip IV by Diego de Velázquez, right at the time when he becomes court painter in 1623. So if we have a look at the wall panel, and what we see is a full-length portrait of King Philip IV of Spain, and kind of a surprisingly somber, austere image, which today we'd like to talk about a little bit of the keys and clues to help us approach this image and understand the background behind it. So it is an austere image, but filled with references to his status. For example, just the decoration of the golden fleece, the little golden lamb that hangs as a collar, is enough to prestigiously reinforce his lineage. We also have references to his responsibilities. Just the hilt, his hand on the hilt of the sword refers to his responsibility of defense of his kingdoms. The table next to his hand is a desk, and it refers to his administration of justice, the desk with the top hat. And it's really interesting to think that in Spanish of the time, this desk would be called a bufete. And in modern Spanish, a bufete is related to a law firm. So it has to do with the administration of justice. And combined with the paper in his hand is his administration of audience, giving an audience, and his administrative duties. Now, Velázquez is really subtly addressing the political atmosphere that is happening at the beginning of the reign, the first few years of the reign of Philip IV. He and his prime minister, the Count Duke of Olivares, and the other new advisors really want to distance themselves from the earlier elites that are considered to have given favoritism and were given to squandering. And so the austerity has to do with the desire for reform. And what is really charged with meaning is the black dress. The dark suit, it's much more somber than customary, and it has than an other royal portrait, and it has no jewelry and no adornments. And the collar itself is even more significant. It is a valona, or a walloon collar, that replaced the earlier lechuguilla. And so we're lucky that we have right next to us Philip IV's father, Philip III, wearing a lechuguilla, and we can see how decorative and complicated and filled with work to make it stand up properly to create that beautiful collar. But so the collar itself in Philip IV reinforces his ideas, a desire to reform, desire for austerity, his kind of dedication to we're going to really address public welfare and work. But it's interesting that in public, Philip IV would appear in much more decorative and luxurious dress, but in the official portrait that Velázquez is creating, he avoids all of this type of extra luxury. And he really emphasizes one of the king's most important duties as a ruler, and that is giving an audience. So contemporary descriptions written at the time say, that describe the audience with the king, that he was standing, he was wearing the golden fleece, and he would be leaning against the table. So this is very appropriate and historically based of how an audience with the king would be. And this paper in his hand serves the function of a memoranda. And the memoranda would be given to the king in advance, and it was the advanced knowledge of what the person with the audience of the king would be requesting. So we have the king in somber attire, very serious and rigorous, and giving his attention to his audience, attending the needs. Now, Velázquez places the king in a very stark space, shaped with subtle gradations of light and color, and also no decoration like curtains, so following the same line. And within the space, he brings the king very close to the viewer. The darks, even though it's a somber, dark dress, it is filled with a variety of shades and tones, I mean, very rich. The king's posture is firm but relaxed, and the rendering of his face gives us a very distant and impassive expression, and this is directly related to the idea that the king is very far away from us. He is an idea of royal majesty. What's interesting is that we know from X-rays that Velázquez would probably reworked this first painting maybe 4 years later. So the first image was in 1623, and maybe 4 years later he reworks it, because the X-rays show us more than 2 arms, more than 2 legs, changes to the face, changes to the positions, and we can see those here, as we call them pentimenti. If you see, even just with visual observation, we can see the shadow of a 3rd leg, for example. And these are changes that were reworked by Velázquez just a few years later. And what he did was he made the king more slender. He reduced the cape. He made adjustments to the feet, bring them much more together. And this would have made the figure much more elongated and much more ethereal, further away from us, less human, less material. And he really reworked the face, because the king's features has matured, and it would have been interesting to show him as a more mature monarch. So here he's in his early 20s versus that he would have been in his late teens in the underpainting. So what is Velázquez will work with the king for the next almost 40 years, and they're so important to the whole collections within the museum. Both Philip IV's love and passion for the arts and as patron of the arts, and the fact that Velázquez was painting mostly for the court and was only seen by people who had access to the court in Spain. And so it was opening the Prado Museum that really the rest of the world, beginning 200 years ago, started to be able to see and appreciate the works by Velázquez. But here we have his first official image of the king, which was very astutely interpreting the political ambience of the time, a very surprising image for a monarch, and one that was very able to capture the political message of the time. So thank you very much for being with us today, and we'll see you again next week.